This is Family Time 185, and we're talking about relationship skills. The task I want you to perform this week is I want you to identify something you deem to be a positive relationship. Could be a friendship, could be a romantic relationship. Hopefully, it's one from your life. Maybe it's a relationship that you have or one you get to see, maybe a relationship in your family or in your friendship group, something like that. If you're having a hard time thinking of an example from your own life, it can be a relationship from a movie, a TV show, something that you find like, oh man, that just seems like a really good relationship, or I would like to have a relationship like that. And I want you to try to identify the characteristics that you think make a healthy relationship, however you want to define that. I want you to spend some time trying to break down what makes a healthy relationship. And for me, I just jotted down a couple of different things. If I'm thinking about a healthy relationship, and sometimes we think of relationships as like romantic relationships, but it really the same components go into healthy friendships. And it's important to examine the relationships we have. There's kind of the old adage that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think that really is true, whether it's exactly 5 people or not. But the people you spend a lot of time with, you kind of rub off on each other, and there is sort of this collective sort of personality that emerges a little bit for better or worse. So it's really important to understand and examine the people we spend the most time with. It's important to examine what our relationships are putting into our lives and what we can put back into our relationships. We're relational animals, human beings. And we do a lot of things, we'll measure someone's wealth in terms of financial wealth. But we don't always do things like, it would be interesting to have a measurement on sort of a person's net friendships. Because I think that probably says a lot more about that person. And in the most important ways, when we have strong, meaningful relationships, that's as wealthy as we can be. That's as successful as we can be. So we have to examine those things. For myself, I just jotted on a couple different things that I think make healthy relationships. One, I think, is similar values. And this is to me. Your list doesn't need to be similar to mine, but similar values. If I'm around people who have a different work ethic than I do, or are pursuing different things than I am in terms of, maybe they value material things more than I do, or things like that, there's just a disconnect. And that's not to denigrate or judge anyone else. But if there's a disconnect in values, I think that becomes difficult. And that becomes very difficult in our friendships. The other thing for me, that is an important part of a healthy relationship is I want the other person in the relationship to challenge me in positive ways. I think of that all the time with my wife and with my other best friends, who will sometimes call me out on certain things that I need. There are certain things about like my personality trait. It's like, my wife will joke with me and she'll point them out like specifically, but not in a negative way where, I do certain things where it's like, I maybe have a tendency to like bulldoze people a little bit sometimes, where I'm like, well, this is the decision we're making. We're just going to go because I sometimes don't like talking in circles. I don't like overthinking things. I'm like, well, let's come up with a couple options and go. Let's rip and run. And it's like, okay, sometimes I gotta remember, take a step back and make sure everybody gets a chance to bring their opinion to the table, that sort of thing. Or, my friends will point out that, sometimes I'm good about maybe including other people in my activities. Like, hey, these are my hobbies. These are things that I'm into. If you want to join me, that's great. But I don't always take the steps the other direction where it's like, hey, here's something you're into. Let me try that. So that maybe goes back to bulldozing a little bit. But like, those are things that I want from a relationship. I want to be able to learn and grow through that relationship. And I think the best relationships do grow. They don't stay the same, and they grow, and people grow together instead of growing in different directions. Those are the healthiest relationships. I also think in a really healthy relationship, we shouldn't be competing with each other. Now, there might be some instances. I think of like some of my best friends from college. Now, we literally were competing against each other in football in college. But sometimes that competitiveness slides over into everything. Didn't matter if we're playing ping pong in the student rec center, like we were competing in that too. But I mean in the relationship, like not keeping score. That becomes something that I think undermines a lot of relationships. It undermines a lot of romantic relationships for sure, where it's like, oh, well, you did this nice gesture for me, so now I need to do this nice gesture for you, and I need to one-up it. And then, as longer the relationship goes, you get married and things, it's like, well, okay, I took out the garbage, now you should wash the dishes. Now, whatever, like that keeping score becomes a problem. The best relationships is we complement each other. Like you're bringing things to the table that I'm not so good at. Hopefully, I'm bringing things to the table that you're maybe not as good at. And one of the best definitions for like a healthy relationship, I think, comes from, I don't remember if it was the first Rocky or Rocky 2. Maybe it seemed like a weird place to draw relationship advice from. But somebody's asking Rocky about his relationship with Adrian. That's the central relationship in the movies, if you've never seen them. And he says, she fills gaps. Like, what do you mean? Like, well, I got gaps, she's got gaps, together we fill gaps. And it's like, well, that's such a beautiful image of a relationship. It's like, yeah, all of us have gaps. All of us have shortcomings. And those best relationships, that other person brings some strengths that fill your gaps. And hopefully you can work to do the same thing for the other person. I know, like, my wife, who is like, she's my favorite person. She fills my gaps in a lot of ways, where she brings so many wonderful things and strength and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, like I know that she fills a lot of gaps in my life and in my personality and all those sorts of things. And the biggest thing for me, like if I had to pick the number one thing that I look for in a healthy relationship, is that other person's going to back me up. And I'm going to back that person up. And that goes for all relationships. I look at it, in the friendships, like the friends that I have that are like my closest friends that I really care about, even if we haven't talked to each other for a while, even if we have some dissimilar interests and things like that, I always feel like, okay, if that person's got my back, and like I know that, like I know I could call them in the middle of the night, they'd come running, that counts with me a lot. That loyalty, that goes a long way with me. And that's how I am with my relationships. It's like, all right, if we're in, then I'm all in. Like I got your back when you need something. So that really carries a heavy weight with me. The other thing I want you to think about is self-advocacy a little bit. And that starts to be a component of how we deal with maybe unhealthy relationships, which we'll talk about that a little bit in class too. Maybe, the things that don't have what you're looking for in a relationship, those become unhealthy relationships. And there's certainly very negative relationships where somebody's taking advantage of someone else, abusing someone else. That's a very extreme level. But it's important for us to understand just unhealthy relationships that aren't bringing anything to our lives. Sometimes I call those like emotional vampires, where we have maybe a relationship with someone who seems to really drain our energy, really drain our emotions, and we're not getting anything back in return. Not that you should go into a relationship looking to gain something, but we do have to understand when those unhealthy relationships exist. And sometimes the healthiest thing we can do for ourselves is cut those relationships out of our lives. And you can cut a relationship out of your life, and it doesn't even mean that you stop caring about that person. Sometimes you can care deeply about a person, but understand that maybe some of their habits, some of their behaviors run counter to what you want to do, run counter to your values, to your goals. So it's better for you to sort of sever that relationship. And it's really hard at your age, students, to realize sometimes that you don't have to like everyone. Everyone doesn't have to like you. Now, I don't ever believe in bullying someone, being mean to someone. There's no good reason for that. But it's okay for you to say, this person, this is not for me. The way that they do things, their behaviors, that's not for me. I don't need to enjoy time with that person. They don't need to enjoy time with me. That's fine. We can be done. But the last thing I'll say with that self-advocacy is don't let good advice become a bad excuse. What I mean by that is, sometimes I think we play on either extreme, or we'll have a negative relationship, something that's not healthy, and we'll keep pouring energy into it, and we really aren't gaining anything. The relationship's really not healthy, and we keep pouring too much energy into it. And then sometimes we go too far the other way. People are like, well, you have to advocate for yourself. You do have to advocate for yourself. But sometimes with relationships, people will be like, oh, it's not supposed to be this hard. And it's like, who said that? The best things in life are hard. Relationships, which are the best things in life, they're difficult sometimes. I'm talking about all relationships. Your friendships. Sometimes we think, well, friendship should just be this natural thing. And in some ways, maybe it is. They're like, yeah, I don't know, I just vibe with this person. But we have to put work into it if we want that friendship to stay strong, if we want it to grow, if we want it to be something that's a lifelong thing. And it's okay to understand, too, that some people come into our life for a reason, positive or negative. We learn something from it, but maybe that relationship moves on. We learn something from it. Some people come into our life for a season, a small period of our life, and maybe we're really close for a while. And then some people come into our life for a lifetime. They're like, that's a lifelong relationship. And all of those relationships are important. All of them serve a role in our lives. But it's important to work on the relationships we want to sustain. I see it in like romantic relationships all the time. People are like, it shouldn't be this difficult, whatever. It's like, well, are you putting the work in? You have to put the work in. I've had plenty of failed relationships, things like that. And a lot of times it comes down to people putting the work in. I'm talking broadly, like, okay, you have to continue to do things to make the other person feel important, supported, and that's in all relationships. So let's think about our relationships a little bit this week. Let's look at the hopefully healthy relationships we have in our lives, identify some of the characteristics of a healthy relationship, or some of the characteristics we'd like to have in our relationships. That's really the most important thing. Until next time, much love.